Panelists, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, and fellow board members. Indeed, it's my privilege to open this inaugural Chairman's Roundtable on US elections and the future of Indo-Pacific. We welcome all of you to today's session, and we are glad to announce that we have participants from 15 countries. Over 270 have registered for this session. The Indian Chamber has served the needs of businesses and the business community at large since 1924. SICCI strives to give its members a competitive edge in the global market by providing them with diverse insights, connections, and support services. Indian businesses make up the single largest contingent of business corporates in Singapore. We offer an array of business support services, including trade matching, job matching, business advisory, networking sessions, seminars, and skills training. Now, SICCI aims to be the gateway of opportunity for businesses in the region, helping both homegrown and international companies realize their full potential. SICCI has two specific vehicles to help companies registered in Singapore grow and internationalize. These are SME at SICCI and the International Business Division. Through these services, SICCI aims to champion and further its members' interests. We have a committee focused on international and bilateral trade relations and would be eager to work with chambers overseas to connect their members to ours. The Chairman's Roundtable is a series of high-level interactions that I've introduced to bring relevance to global ideas that will benefit Asian business communities and enable Singapore to connect with them successfully. One such idea is that of the Indo-Pacific. President Trump first outlined his vision for a free and open Indo-Pacific at the APEC CEO Summit in Vietnam in 2017. Stretching from the west coast of the United States to the west coast of India, this region is one of the greatest engines of future global economy, and it is already as today. According to Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, the Indo-Pacific vision excludes no nation. It seeks to work with anyone to promote a free and open Indo-Pacific, so long as that cooperation adheres to the highest standards of partnership and citizenry. Therefore, every one of us in the whole world should have a stake in Indo-Pacific's peace and prosperity. At the onset, the US committed $213 million to the new initiative to support foundational areas of the future, that is digital economy, energy, and infrastructure for just 2017 alone. There was a $25 million commitment to digital connectivity and cybersecurity partnership to better the communication capacity of member countries. The Asia Edge was another initiative which stands for Enhancing Development and Growth Through Energy. This was a $50 million investment to import, produce, store, and deploy energy resources. The US also announced a 30 million infrastructure transaction and assistance network, which provides advisory, technical, and financial advisory to help partners access legal and financial services. It also formed a Blue Dot network to guide high quality infrastructure development in the region. ASEAN is literally at the center of Indo-Pacific, and it plays a central role in the Indo-Pacific vision. Regional institutions like ASEAN, the ASEAN Connect initiatives, APEC, the Lower Mekong Initiative, and the Indian Ocean Rim Association are strongly supported by the US. The Indo-Pacific Business Forum, IPBF in short, which was convened on 27 and 28 of October 2020, is a key vehicle that promotes trade, investments, and economic cooperation in member countries. Unfortunately, 2020 has thrown several curveballs. The change in the US presidency is likely to add a significant change to how America relates to the rest of the world and Asia in particular. What is the future of the Indo-Pacific? Should the Indo-Pacific broaden its stakeholders and embrace leadership from the East? How can regional and Singapore businesses benefit from this network? Would an Indo-Pacific Chamber of Commerce be necessary to serve as a key vehicle to set the agenda for the Indo-Pacific? I hope our distinguished panelists in their interaction with you would be able to answer some of these questions and more. Without speculating and with the assumption that the Indo-Pacific is too important for the Americans alone, I would like to invite the moderator, Mr. George Abraham, to introduce our speakers and commence the discussion proper. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chandru, for setting the tone for the discussion. It is my pleasure to briefly introduce you to the speakers in their order of presentations. Our first speaker is Mr. Olin Wethington, who has served in a variety of senior positions in the US Treasury Department. He was a special envoy to China in 2005 and served as a special assistant to former President George Bush and executive secretary to the Economic Policy Council. He is a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council and its Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security, and he will tell us about the incoming administration's view of the Indo-Pacific. Our second speaker, who has now joined us, will provide an Indian perspective on the Indo-Pacific. He is Professor S.D. Muni, who is a member of the Institute of Defense Studies and Analysis, Executive Council. He is also an emeritus professor of International Relations and South Asian Studies at the Jawaharlal Nehru University, where he taught for 40 years. He served as India's ambassador to Lao People's Democratic Republic and was bestowed with the Sri Lanka Ratna by Sri Lanka's highest honor for a foreign national. Our third speaker is Mr. Mark Finlay, a congressional special advisor who has served some of the world's largest and best-known corporations. Mr. Finlay has been involved in several significant diplomatic efforts and multilateral engagements, including Sino-American and European-USA Track 2 discussions. He was deeply involved in the Northern Ireland peace and post-conflict transformation process. He is a fellow of the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors and a chartered surveyor by profession. He will share with us his deep insights on the infrastructure and development in the region. Our fourth speaker, Dr. Shahzad Nazim, who is also advisor to the Singapore Indian Chamber of Commerce and Industries Management Board, is a group executive chairman of Minehart Singapore Private Limited, a multinational company which has 52 offices headquartered in Singapore. The company is the largest independent engineering company in Asia. He has invested in the countries of the Indo-Pacific, and he will have deep insights on numerous opportunities in the region. So without further ado, let me introduce the last speaker, Dr. Iftikhar Ahmad Chowdhury, who is a Bangladeshi career diplomat and former Minister of Foreign Affairs. So may I invite Mr. Weddington to address us? Mr. Weddington, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Abram. I'm very pleased to be here to the Singapore Indian Chamber. Let me convey my compliments for your spirit of entrepreneurship and your mission of expanded trade. And in case you are wondering, yes, it is a little past 2 a.m. Washington time, but I'm nonetheless pleased to be part of this, this program. Let me state at the outset that I speak only for myself. I do not speak for any political party or any organization. Certainly, I do not speak for President-elect Biden or his campaign or his transition. I speak in a personal capacity only. And I focus on what I expect to happen, not on what I want to happen or my personal preferences. The forecast question and the normative question are two different things. The U.S. indeed has just held an historic election. President-elect Biden is the oldest individual ever elected to the U.S. presidency, and Kamala Harris is the first woman vice president. And I must say, I do not need to tell this audience that her mother's birthplace is India. The world's two largest democracies indeed have another bond. This election also saw the highest number of votes ever cast in America, and immense enthusiasm for democracy, I believe. And please, let me say at the outset, please do not doubt America's resilience or its capacity for renewal. So what might we expect in terms of policy toward Asia and the Indo-Pacific? In a sentence, on substance, I think it will be part continuity and part departure from the predecessor administration. However, on style and tone, I think there will be significant divergence. First, on style and tone, the atmospherics of American diplomacy, I believe, will change. We can expect more measured rhetoric, more strategic thinking, more orderly communication with allies. I believe more predictability and consistency. Mr. Biden understands diplomacy, and he will seek to build trust and credibility, I believe. Expect also some early moves to symbolically signal departure, such as the United States rejoining the Paris Climate Accord, rejoining the World Health Organization, and expressing a willingness to work with others on the pandemic, particularly vaccine distribution. So I would like to reference 5 dimensions that I think will characterize Mr. Biden's policy toward the Indo-Pacific region. First, starting with security, national security. I think the incoming Biden administration will move very early to affirm global security commitments and strategic partnerships. And this will include assuring allies in Asia on security commitments, including particularly Japan and South Korea. The United States 2018 National Defense Strategy identified China as the primary long-term strategic competitor. That orientation, I believe, will continue under Mr. Biden. Mr. Biden will prioritize strengthening ties with allies and partners to address common threats, including strategic partnership with India and Australia. Mr. Biden will also seek, I believe, to strengthen deterrence and deterrence in so-called gray zones. He will pursue military force modernization and the credibility of American willingness to act. I believe the Biden administration will give priority to emerging technologies to ensure that the United States maintains its military edge to address asymmetric threats. This will include more investment in technology, artificial intelligence, quantum, directed energy to address hybrid threats. I believe we can expect more emphasis on resilience, on stockpiling, on reshoring, on attention to the U.S. industrial base. As to burden sharing, particularly as to South Korea in the military realm, I think we can expect a more cooperative approach. The Biden administration, I believe, will not threaten removal of troops from South Korea. Mr. Biden agrees with maximum pressure on the DPRK, but he is not inclined, I believe, to symmetry. He will want to see tangible progress first. As to the general security environment in Asia, it is complex with potential volatility. With China, neither country wants war, but the risk of miscalculation, I believe, is high. Forces are in close proximity. That includes, in particular, the South China Sea and the Taiwan Straits. There is needed a framework for management of potential conflict, military to military communication, which today is lacking. And I believe Mr. Biden and his team understand this reality. Secondly, on China more broadly, I think we can expect Mr. Biden to take a strong position on China. China's assertiveness has hardened American perceptions. This is bipartisan. Affected by China's predatory behavior on trade, its domestic repression, and its coercive activity throughout the Indo-Pacific region, witnessed in the South China Sea, the East China Sea against Taiwan, Hong Kong, and with India along the Himalayan border. The Biden administration, I believe, will continue freedom of navigation operations in contested waters and military exercises with the Quad, which includes India. Expect also the Biden administration to continue to take a hard position on limitation of technology flows to China. Sanctions on Huawei and ZTE and many others, I believe, will be continued. The U.S. will focus on supply chain integrity and protection of intellectual property. The incoming administration, I believe, will seek to rally other countries around a common strategy on China, allies and like-minded countries. But I believe it will also seek a framework of cooperation where there possibly is common ground. Mr. Biden is likely to engage with China on climate change, on pandemic response, and also, I believe, international financial stability. As to Taiwan, Mr. Biden has a track record of supporting Taiwan. He congratulated President Tsai on her 2020 election. The U.S. will not pull back, I believe, but it will be sensitive to boundaries and will react to Chinese pressure. My third point on the global economy. I believe the incoming Biden administration will move early on the global economy, brought on by current challenges from the pandemic, to renew the practice of international cooperation in times of crisis. We might even expect to see a U.S. proposal to convene the G20. I think we can expect support for advanced country commitments to international financial stability and to the utilization of the multilateral and regional financial institutions and related processes. I believe there will be sensitivity to developing country debt, which is growing, and a goodwill to work on management and restructure of this debt. As to institutional reform of the World Trade Organization, I think there will be an inclination, but it is not clear, I believe at this point, how much appetite there will be for new rules. We can expect Biden administration opposition to predatory trade and to protectionism, but I think it is likely to hesitate to back new multilateral trade rounds and big new trade deals. Will the United States enter the comprehensive partnership, the so-called TPP? I think that is an uphill battle in the US Congress. And I believe Mr. Biden will address US competitiveness strengthening at home before big trade deals. But perhaps there is room for some effort on limited deals, such as in data security and digital trade, and possibly new agreements and approaches on so-called public goods that relate to pandemics and to climate change. I believe Mr. Biden in the economic sphere will probably not undo in-place export controls and sanctions, although we may see some easing of tariffs. But in general, the incoming Biden administration, I believe, will be less inclined on unilateral tariffs and sanctions on friends. I think it will shift decoupling, so-called, to a more targeted approach with more focus on specific sectors to promote reshoring. Number 4, a comment or two on institutions and rules. I believe the incoming Biden administration will affirm the rules-based liberal order, including the vision of a free and open Indo-Pacific region. It will seek to strengthen institutions and arrangements. It will focus on governance and rules. The Biden administration, I believe, will be less unilateral, more multilateral, and will return to a more strategic use of multilateral institutions and attentiveness to alliances and to regional relationships like ASEAN, APEC, and the East Asia Summit. I believe we can expect an emphasis on diplomatic statecraft and an increase in resources for the US State Department and for its diplomacy. The Biden position, however, is not clear, at least to me, on whether there is a need for new structures in the Asia-Pacific region. Is there a need for new frameworks within which like-minded nations can integrate security, diplomacy, economic, and intelligence? We will have to wait to see, I believe, how that dimension unfolds. And lastly, number 5, I would emphasize that the Biden administration will give attention to human rights and democracy issues. I believe it sees ideological competition, not just great power competition. It will seek cooperation with democratic allies to shape the global order, common cause around common values, and broad approaches beyond rhetoric, extending in particular cases to economic sanctions. Mr. Biden has gone so far as to suggest a summit of democracies in his first year. With the US and its allies and friends around the world, we occupy collectively 60% of the world economy, China is 15%. There is much that can be done to strengthen the current liberal order by bringing democracies together, backed by senior political support and appropriate resources. Thank you very much. Be glad to respond to questions in that question and answer period. Thank you, Mr. Abram.
That was an interesting roundup of the current situation. Mr. Wethington, we will have the question and answer session later. So I would like to invite our second speaker, Professor Muni, to speak. Because of the time constraints, I hope the speakers will stick to 10 minutes if possible, because we have a lot of questions that are coming up and we'd like to use the question and answer session to further elaborate on some of the issues. Can you please?
Thank you very much.
Yeah, can you please unmute yourself, please?
I have unmuted.
Yes.
Am I audible?
Thank you, Professor Muni.
Thank you very much. Thanks to SICCI and its chairman, Dr. Chandru, as well as my best friend, Johnson Paul, who almost parachuted me to this panel with a very, very short notice. This is a very timely theme. All of us have hopes as well as anxieties unfolding about the unfolding US policy towards this region. India has a deep interest, both civilizational, economic, even strategic interests. And that has been for centuries. In fact, our economy is linked to this region. India in the past, as also in the present, has grown, prospered by engagement with this region. And we hope to continue with that. Now, US, of course, has been a major player in shaping the contours strategically and economically of this region for almost 7 decades. It has played a critical role in ensuring peace and stability in the region, growth and prosperity of this region, and I would say even a phenomenal rise of Asia economically, so that the global powers center is shifting towards Asia. And this includes China's rise. But the present peaceful order, the prevailing peaceful order has come under duress at present. And I think there are 2 reasons for that. One is on account of China's assertiveness, even expansion, and at times aggressiveness. And you see these instances in South China Sea, in the Himalayas, in relation to Japan. And US is also feeling quite disturbed about the possible challenge to its dominance in the region. And the second, therefore, connected and implied cause is for the US to challenge China in this respect. In fact, all of us want a peaceful and stable region, which is multilateral, with no single dominance anywhere from any side. The US role in this respect has gradually evolved for the past 2 decades. In fact, right starting from the Clinton's administration's second term and so on. And gradually, I think now it has resulted into tensions with China, both economically and strategically, because of the developing situation. The previous administration has, in fact, witnessed an escalation of these tensions. And, the commitment to the region is, of course, deepened during this time. With a new president waiting to assume charge, we all expect that there are some questions which need to be answered. Will China moderate the assertive stance of flaunting its power and clout in the region? The second question is, will US-China tensions lower down? And thirdly, will the US commitment to the stability and growth of this region will be sustained as it has been all these past decades? India expects a yes to the last 2 questions. That yes, I think US commitment would be sustained, as my previous speaker has just underlined very clearly. And hopefully US-China tensions would also lower under the Biden presidency. Their commitment will be sustained in terms of infrastructure, in terms of democracy and peaceful order and peaceful growth. But I think in a redefined approach, we will see more of a smile, comparatively more of a smile than its stealth in the US approach towards China. And that would be visible perhaps in trade negotiations, which are still to be completed and maybe opened in a different way. Maybe handling of Taiwan, I don't know how it unfolds, but there are possibilities that at least the rhetorics would be far more moderated. And on the ideological and human rights issues, the degree of this smile or texture of this smile from the US and I think rest of us would much depend upon how China responds to the first question. Whether it will moderate its own assertive and expansionist stance in the region. And I'm not very sure what the Chinese answer would be. India has joined hand with the US, Japan, Australia, and ASEAN for a very smooth and orderly transition in the region in this kind of a tension which is continuing. And we are prepared to work with them. We all have a broad consensus on Indo-Pacific, particularly in terms of freedom of navigation, transparency, growth, peace, and stability. But sustaining this US commitment is also called for in terms of rebuilding, restructuring, and the pandemic challenge which we are all facing. And I think this is a challenge which the new presidency will have to take. And it is here that the degree of a smile between US and China would also be very critical as to how this comes about. The region needs both China and US to join hands so far as this pandemic fighting is concerned. There are problems of health care. There are problems of rebuilding disrupted supply chains, production lines, and the economies as a whole. And I think if this tension continues, as Mr. Wellington said, that there may be accidental conflicts, it would really be bad for the region. And therefore, all of us expect that the under Biden administration, and Biden presidency is an institutional presidency. It is not a personal presidency in that sense. And I hope you understand what I mean by the preceding administration. And being an institutional, it would be far more rational, as it has already been underlined, and far more measured when it comes to critical and sensitive issues. And therefore, we can see some movement, some redefinition on questions like trade, Taiwan, human rights, ideological issues. But on the whole, I think how it really will pan out will depend upon how China's responses are. If the China's present responses are not moderated, I'm afraid we are waiting for a tough time in the region. And much would be called upon the US leadership and US initiatives in seeing that we have an orderly transition so far as this region is concerned. But the US has accepted multilateralism in the region. And I think that would be sustained. And this is where countries like India, like Japan, Australia, and ASEAN would play a very critical role. And I think all these countries will also have to prepare themselves for the event in terms of their economies and in terms of their, well, ASEAN is not a country, but as a region, in terms of their internal cohesion. Let us hope for the best and wish well to the new administration in US. Thank you.
I would now like to call on Mr. Mark Finlay to give his ideas and presentation on the subject.
Good evening, or good afternoon, or good morning to you. Thank you for allowing me to be with you. Robert Louis Stevenson, the Scottish author, said, "We all make a living selling something." Well, your members, sir, are involved in a $1.9 trillion trading relationship between the United States and the entire region. That is a figure that the US State Department put pen to paper on in talking of the region last year. Secretary Pompeo putting his name to that document. You might want to know what we have just experienced here in the United States. I very much appreciated Mr. Wellington's detailed analysis. My analysis is a little different, but we concur broadly on all of the points that my fellow Washingtonian made. Governor Mario Cuomo, the father of the current New York governor and father of CNN anchor Chris Cuomo, said, "You govern in poetry, or you campaign in poetry, and you govern in prose." Well, I think we would all agree that this last election cycle has been anything but poetic. But the dust will settle. I would encourage you all to give it time to let it settle. And undoubtedly, we will return to normal business fairly soon. Business is all about relationships. In 7 hours' time, I will be back on Capitol Hill. And I will meet with many members on both sides of the aisle who I am privileged to call my friends. I have been privileged to have had somewhat of a ringside seat over this last few years, which has been fascinating, to say the least. I think if I speak to members on either side a little later in my morning, I will hear a broadly similar analysis from them as to what is likely to happen. What have we experienced? What next? What does it mean for us? That is what I would like to address with you now. What? Well, we actually have had, as you know, 3 elections. We've had a Senate election, we've had a House of Representatives election, and we have had the election for the presidency. When you take in the news and media coverage, there's little focus on anything other than the presidential election. Well, what has actually happened in the other 2? In the House of Representatives, the Republican Party has made some significant ground. It's too early yet with a number of seats still to be called. However, it's likely to narrow with 10 to 12 seats picked up by the Republican Party, narrowing the majority held by the Democrats to perhaps as little as 6 or 7 seats. The Republican Party will therefore have their eyes firmly fixed on the midterm elections. The cycle never stops. And they will have hopes of trying to turn over the position in the House of Representatives at the midterm. Oftentimes, presidents coming towards their first midterm don't do so well. Typically, that is the way. So therefore, an incoming Biden presidency will be working hard to ensure that they have some quick wins, as my esteemed colleague from Washington has already outlined. With regard to the Senate election, as I think you know, there is a runoff in the state of Georgia in the 2 critical seats that have yet to be decided, as neither nobody got a more than 50% in the election. So we're facing another election in the near term, and both parties are deploying all of their big guns in the area, eyeing the prize and seeing the significance of it. I think my sense is that the Republican Party will probably keep one of those Senate seats, and perhaps two on a good day, but likely one. The process of a runoff requires that all the other people drop out, and it's literally two people running for the seat. So with a smaller field, it's likely to be one, which leaves the Republican Party with a likely majority in the Senate of 51 to 49. What does all this mean? It means a degree of balance and stability. Markets like it when there is power in one party in one house and the other house holding the power with a different party. I agree completely with the analysis earlier on that a Biden administration will seek to enter into relationships like the Paris Accord. And likewise, on the issue of health, there are two sides to the coin that America discovered with the COVID crisis. The first was that it was too reliant, perhaps, on your region for its supply chain in the medical supplies and other areas. The other side of the same coin is they recognize the need to have those trading relationships with you. And in that, I see an enormous opportunity. Mr. Wellington referred to the reshoring of supply chain to the United States. I would proffer for your members that that creates an enormous opportunity for investment, foreign direct investment in the United States. And I am sure that whoever holds the presidency, the administration will be seeking to attract new manufacturing capabilities and capacity in the US. So I see that as being an area for great cooperation in the coming years. Regarding another area that Mr. Wellington referred to, and that is human rights. I think that there will be a degree of continuity again in this area. Just earlier today, I was speaking to Ambassador Sam Brownback, who is the US Ambassador for Religious Freedom, and he is participating this week in the international gathering on religious freedom, which is being hosted by Poland, that has been hosted by the State Department for the last 2 years. And I know that that's an area that the administration is going to be looking at very closely with regard to China and with regard to other countries' performance in that arena. So generally speaking, my sense is that not much will happen over this next period of time because of the balance of power and the structure of the government in the United States. I think that the opportunities are enormous for your region to further its trading relationships. The COVID crisis has seen our people cooped up rather too long. It has also seen a dramatic acceleration in the e-commerce trading platforms. And that in itself has created a wealth of new relationships with companies from from the Indo-Pacific region. I might close again on the issue of elections. You referred, one of the previous speakers referred to Vice President-elect Harris's ethnic background and connection with India. I would suggest there may be a possibility that the next election could see 2 women competing, both of whom have an Indian background and parentage, which would create some very significant interest. I would keep a close eye on the passage of Governor Nikki Haley from South Carolina, who was previously in the United Nations. That would make for an interesting election that I'm sure your members would enjoy watching with great interest. But thank you for your time and for allowing me to participate.
Thank you, Mark Finlay. Can I now request Dr. Shahzad? Thank you, Mr. Mark Finlay. Can I request Dr. Shahzad Nasim to make his presentation, please?
Thank you, George. Chairman SICCI, Dr. Chandru, Mr. Moderator, my fellow panelists, ladies and gentlemen. Coming from the private sector, I will share my views with you on how we could work alongside the governments to advance our common goal for the growth and development of the region. I'll summarize my views by making 3 points. First, of course, is the just concluded US elections. Our region, along with many other countries in the world, feel relieved that this process is finally over, and we can now look beyond the elections into the future. The translation of President-elect Biden's ideas into implementable policies will obviously depend on the makeup of the Congress and the Senate. I am by no means a political analyst, so I should confine myself to the potential ramifications on the narrow field of economics, and more specifically, the infrastructure. It is not difficult to predict, however, as has been stated before by my fellow panelists, that there will be greater embrace of multilateralism and possibly a reconsideration of a modified Trans-Pacific partnership. And certainly, emphasis will be placed on the environment. Addressing the issue of COVID is already receiving top priority, and an expert task force has already been established. A high priority will also be accorded to the putting in place a resilient and modern infrastructure. This has been outlined during his campaign. Disruption to supply chains during the COVID was an expensive lesson about having infrastructure that's resilient. In fact, there is a commitment to make a $2 trillion accelerated investment with the aim of deploying these resources over his first term. Eventually, one could expect an overall cost of $2 to $6 trillion by 2030. The idea of massive investments in infrastructure would be to create a more resilient, sustainable, and ultimately a net zero emission economy by 2050. It is intended that there will be a foreign infrastructure plan as well, which would plug US back into the international playing field. Finances would clearly come from traditional foreign assistance programs, such as USAID and World Bank, and possibly the private sector. This would put the US in a strong partnership role with the Indo-Pacific region, including ASEAN. The US is inevitably linked to South and Southeast Asia, and its partnership with countries in the Indo-Pacific region will be critical in ensuring the stability of the region. It has therefore proposed an Indo-Pacific economic corridor. The promotion of regional economic integration will be a key success factor as regional factors are becoming more prominent, trade, and FDI determinants. My second point is about Asia's vast infrastructure requirements. According to ADB, Asia's infrastructure needs are stupendous. In fact, countries need to spend $1.7 trillion per annum until 2030 to maintain the growth trajectory, tackle poverty, and respond to climate change. As we all know, there is a direct correlation between the infrastructure status and the economic development indicators of countries such as GDP, per capita income, etc. Economists generally agree that a well-developed infrastructure fuels economic growth by reducing costs of production, transport of goods and services, and improving productivity. Government reforms could bridge up to 40% of the infrastructure gap, and the rest will have to come from the private sector. In addition to technical expertise, regulatory and institutional reforms would also be needed to render infrastructure more attractive to private sectors. The governments also need to generate a pipeline of bankable projects for public-private partnerships. Obviously, there would also be need to implement PPP-related reforms, including enacting PPP laws, streamlining procurement, and bidding processes. My third and the last point is the critical role that Singapore can play as a connector and prime mover for the Indo-Pacific community to drive the change. Singapore is a thriving financial hub with 60% of project financial transactions in Southeast Asia lead managed by the banks based in Singapore. Singapore offers a vibrant ecosystem for sourcing capital, making deals, hiring talents, and providing stakeholders options for risk management insurance. We have legal firms providing the infrastructure value chain services spanning financial, tax, transactional, and other legal aspects. We were instrumental in enacting the UN Singapore Convention on Mediation. This is a key tool in dispute resolution at the global stage. From master planning to engineering design, procurement and construction, our firms are equipped with the expertise across the value chain for local and regional projects. If I might add, a good example of this kind of corporate entity is the one I have the honor to chair, Meinhardt Group International. Founded in Melbourne, Australia in 1955, slightly before my time, where it still has a large footprint. It's today's Singapore headquartered, world-renowned company providing end-to-end services. These cover a wide spectrum, including feasibility studies, master planning, designing, and management for all types of built environment projects, including landmark urban developments, smart cities, and major public infrastructure projects across the globe. Meinhardt is present in many of the Indo-Pacific countries. In fact, 3/4 of our 52 offices are located in the Indo-Pacific region. We are in the process of further expanding and strengthening our presence in countries like Australia, India, Japan, and South Korea, and indeed the US, given its strategic importance for the region. We can play a key role in helping to integrate the many project opportunities arising from Indo-Pacific Economic Corridor, especially in the areas of data centers, healthcare, transportation, logistics, and new breed of real estate projects. There is a huge demand in these sectors arising from the recent pandemic. Singapore has the convening capacity not only to bring the Indo-Pacific community together, but also to negotiate deals that will yield positive outcomes. To that extent, as the advisor for the Singapore Indian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, I'm sure SICCI, under the leadership of Dr. Chandru, will rise to the occasion and play a leadership role in this effort. We are particularly bullish about opportunities in India. To sum up, the Indo-Pacific region has tremendous potential. In order to reach fruition, the support of key allies like US will be essential. We are confident this will be forthcoming from the new Biden administration in Washington. We will also need a conflict-free region, for the creation of which we hope all the key regional and global players will do their role to achieve our shared goals. I thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Naseem, thank you for that business perspective to today's discussion. I think when we come to the question and answer session, we'll have much more requests for the business perspective. I'd like now to ask Dr. Iftikhar Ahmed Chowdhury, who is a Bangladeshi career diplomat and a former Minister of Foreign Affairs, to make his presentation. He has had a distinguished career in the diplomatic service and has a wealth of experience. Dr. Chowdhury, please.
Many thanks, moderator, Chairman Chandru, friends, colleagues. I should be frightfully remiss were I to begin without stating how beholden I am to SICCI for inviting me to be a speaker at this timely webinar. Might I add that I hold no public office in my country, Bangladesh, and my views are my own. Nonetheless, these are sharpened and honed by decades of exposure to global diplomacy in the region and in the wider world on Bangladesh's behalf. My country has benefited enormously from rule-based trading system. Once termed a basket case, today, as per IMF predictions, it is poised to surpass even the larger neighbor India in terms of per capita GDP income, GDP this year. Now to cut to the chase, the US polls are over, though the dust is yet to fully settle. Though it is Americans who have made the choice or their choices, the outcome will affect the rest of humanity. Such is the impact of US hard and soft power. Now let us begin by defining the terms of our deliberation, or the key terms of our deliberation. The term Indo-Pacific, for instance, which is now indelibly inscribed in global political lexicon, is part of a process of a series of American strategic reimaginings of the Asian order over the past 2 US administrations. But the new concept appeared to generate a modicum of reticence. There were 3 broad reasons for it. First, neither the strategy nor the geographical scope of the nomenclature were properly explained. The confusion was further exacerbated by President Donald Trump's use of the phrase free and open Indo-Pacific, which was also unclarified. Second, many countries in Southeast Asia, and I can add in South Asia such as my own, would be chary of the rhetoric that have accompanied the concept. These appear to offer a choice between the US and China, which these nations are reluctant to make. And third, and this is relevant to the ASEAN, its centrality to the concept, that is ASEAN's centrality to the concept, as sine qua non for acceptance, seemed lacking. So when a senior minister of the region said, and I paraphrase, that we will not sign anything unless we know exactly what it is, the sentiment resonated with many in South and Southeast Asia. To them, to these countries, the idea seemed neither fish, flesh, fowl, nor good red herring. Indonesia spearheaded the efforts to effect ASEAN centrality. Ultimately, at the 34th ASEAN Summit, the concept found acknowledgement, albeit rejecting the notion of Indo-Pacific as one continuous territorial space. Instead, it was seen as comprising 2 distinct regions, the Asia-Pacific and the Indian Ocean. Now, this was in consonance with an earlier Japanese vision. Importantly, the ASEAN position accorded special attention to maritime cooperation, connectivity, infrastructure, and other economic cooperation. However, there could be some unease in certain quarters of the two regions in emphasizing the security aspects only, as evident in the Quad dialogue between the US, Australia, Japan, and India. While most countries want a larger US presence in the region and share Anglo-Saxon views, to them, any perception that the Indo-Pacific is being bookended to China's disadvantage will be disconcerting, particularly now that China is a key member of the RCEP mega trade deal. Of course, this has to do with China's inexorable rise and the accompanying burgeoning influence. Many Asian nations are seeking to follow suit in the flying geese paradigm, a Japanese intellectual construct of the 1930s. The Chinese like to express themselves in maxims and metaphors. Deng Xiaoping, whose opening up of China and the market orientation had initiated the process leading to its current prosperity, had urged, and I quote, "Hide your capabilities and bide your time," unquote. Not so the current leadership of the far less demure Xi Jinping. His motivation is imbued with a sense of nationalism, but one with a peculiarly Chinese strain. His mantra is, as one would say in Mandarin, "Zhangguo Mang," or China Dream. It broadly comprises three elements. One, a win-win collaboration with partners bringing prosperity to all. Two, boosting domestic economy by creating demand, which is now widened into what they call the dual circulation strategy, including inner and outer circulation. Those of you who followed the previous plenum, last plenum of the Communist Party would be aware of this. And three, a new kind of big power relationship with the United States. The major fruition of the China Dream is the Road and Belt Initiative, or RBI, the massive mega project interconnecting scores of countries across continents. To reach that new kind of relationship with the United States, the Chinese appear to be racing to reach peer status. Now, it is received wisdom among political realists that when an unsated power relates to a sated power, instability results. The Greek historian Thucydides had famously observed, when Athens grew strong, there was great fear in Sparta. Closer to our times, Andre Gunder Frank had worried not so much about the rise of China as about America's response to it. Back to the US elections outcome. President-elect Joe Biden will assume assume office on the come 20th January. If Congress permits, and this is probably a big if, the predilections of the Biden administration would be towards a multilateral approach. America is back was his message to Angela Merkel and the European leaders when he spoke to them. While some have seen a hardening of position vis-a-vis China, the flip side of the coin could be a mature and complex relationship. For if both the US and China are committed to multilateralism, there would be areas of agreement, climate change was mentioned as an example, and disagreement. But the current stark divisiveness of the world could be reversed. If Biden wishes to bridge a divided America, he might logically wish to at least help build bridges across a divided world. The US and China to each other can be the greatest competitor and not necessarily the greatest threat, as Biden once remarked himself. Evidence suggests that Biden will have tremendous global goodwill to counsel and support him should he choose to take this path. Meantime, China can and should eschew the temptation to pursue any hard path strategy and be patient. That would be in line with its cultural norms. The Chinese can often take a long and unhasty view of time. In fact, this could be a negotiating asset. It is said that when asked about his view on the impact of history of the French Revolution of 1789, Zhou Enlai in the 1960s had calmly responded, "It is too soon to tell." I thank you.
Thank you for a very interesting expansion of the theme that we have today. We now have a little time before the question and answer session, and we are pleased to have with us Dr. Vijay Chautawale, who is in charge of Foreign Affairs Department of the Bharatiya Janata Party, and he has been there since November 2014. And in this role, he is coordinating with Indian diaspora worldwide through BJP's global outreach platform, the Overseas Friends of BJP, which has chapters in more than 40 countries. Before joining active politics, he has worked in senior management roles in pharmaceutical research and development for 18 years, and his last role was as vice president in Torrent Pharmaceuticals, India. I would now like to invite Dr. Vijay to make some comments based on the speakers' ideas that have been given this afternoon.
Thank you, Mr. Abraham. And thanks all the panelists, and also thank you to my friend Johnson for adding me at the last moment though. I will be very quick. I broadly agree with the remarks of Mr. Wellington, who has said that there will be many more areas of convergence between India and US, not to say about the climate change, etc. But many strategic areas also there will be a lot of convergence. Both Obama administration and Trump administration has built a strategic partnership by signing various foundation agreements between two countries, and the future relations will be built on these foundation agreements, and also sharing a lot of critical data, technologies, etc. And both the countries, both India and US, will continue to benefit from these agreements. The second part is there are several shared interest beyond strategic partnership, which India and US would like to work together on common interest, such as climate change, and also the pandemic has given a new challenge, and also to overcome the great supply chain challenge, which India can complement with several countries. India has proven its might in the area of supply of medicines in the pandemic, and even before that in the chronic conditions like HIV and AIDS, when India supplied very affordable drugs to African countries. Third is, of course, in the Indo-Pacific region, we share common principles such as freedom to navigate, democracy, and also fair trade practices, which we will continue to work with US. And last but not least, the important part is a bipartisan support India enjoys in US Congress. Of course, there will be some issues of disagreement, but we are not overtly concerned with that, and I am sure in a friendly and mutually beneficial manner, those differences can be mitigated with. Indian diaspora has been playing a very important role in the relations of India and US, and it will continue to do so. The ancestry of Vice President-elect Kamala Harris, of course, is a positive news for us. And therefore, we overall are quite positive about this democratic verdict given by the US citizens. And we look forward to work with US in the days and months to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that brief but precise information that you have given us. I think we now need to move to the question and answer session before we run out of time. And the first question is for Mr. Wellington. And this relates to many of the points made in the discussions today. And the question is, can China be wished away in the Indo-Pacific economic construct? And with RCEP in place, China's presence is seen to be increasing further when the region with other economic powers like ASEAN, Japan, Korea, Australia, and New Zealand come into the picture. So combined with the impact of shrinking international trade due to COVID-19 on the Indo-US trade and investment, is the Indo-Pacific label still relevant?
Thank you for that very important question. I'm tempted to move from speaking as an observer of incoming Biden administration to some personal preferences. And I want to be careful to make the distinction between those two standpoints. I think the Biden administration, let me say, first of all, approaches the Indo-Pacific and also its long-term relationship with China in terms of a common interest and common values, which is to say, and I share this this outlook, if we are seeking long-term to build strategic stability and economic prosperity, if we're seeking to respond to certain common aspirations of people from all countries, we need to be clear-eyed about how best that is approached and how we focus our activity, how we allocate our resources around what kind of long-term institutions and structures we build these relationships. And I think the concept, the vision of the Indo-Pacific, and I would not necessarily disagree that there have been areas where clarity conceptually has been lacking, is to focus on the common dimensions in terms of interest and values, and to strengthen institutions around those core concepts. This is not to say that there is not room for China in those constructs. And indeed, I think every administration has recognized that there needs to be a framework of strategic dialogue, of issue-specific dialogue with China, while at the same time we're clear-eyed about our areas of disagreement. The need for focus on both areas of difference and areas of potential collaboration is very real. And I believe that the incoming administration will seek to extend its outreach to encompass areas where there is common area of interest, common areas of importance in such realms as climate change, healthcare, also in economics. I think the incoming administration does not view the economic relationship as suggesting and across the board decoupling, but rather that we build economic relations around a set of open and reciprocal values, and that we join the like-minded in that effort. I don't think that entails opposition to RCEP. I think it does suggest that perhaps there are higher standard agreements that also over time ought to be pursued. And I think the Indo-Pacific region vision sets forth a vision of high quality standards, of transparency, of openness, of reform, of domestic markets where they are linked to international engagement and trading exchange. So I think as we seek to pursue areas of collaboration, we need to keep our eye on the long-term objective here, which is to build a institutional and rules-based framework that embodies the interest and values of democratic and liberally oriented nations.
That sort of sums up the various viewpoints that have been given. I have now a question for Mark Finley. Can you provide more details about human rights focus by the Biden presidency as it relates to Asia Pacific?
I will be very surprised if there is not a degree of continuity between the efforts that I referred to, that Ambassador Sam Brownback and Secretary Pompeo have followed. I think there will be very little change. It remains to be seen whether the Electoral College, of course, confirms the Biden administration first off, and that having been done, who the president-elect will appoint to his cabinet. There has been some suggestion that Senator Chris Coons may be in the running to be his Secretary of State. And I know, for instance, Senator Coons to be a man of faith. He was the co-chair, the Senate co-chair of the US National Prayer Breakfast. And he is well known to the community of faith leaders around the world. And a man of that stature in a role like that will, I'm sure, keep a very close eye and focus. And as I say, I think it will be very much continuity.
For you, sorry. Mark, you finished. I'm sorry. I hope I didn't jump in and interrupt you.
No.
Thank you.
Because I was wondering whether there might be a supplemental, but I'm more than happy to leave my answer to that. It remains to be seen, but I know that Senator Ambassador Brownback's role was an appointee. He had a tough time getting Senate confirmation for the role, but has been widely regarded to have brought great gravitas to that role and given it great emphasis. He will, of course, finish in that role. And so no doubt the Biden administration will want to appoint somebody into that kind of role to follow on his work.
We have a lot of questions coming in, so I'm trying to see if I can merge some of those questions. And Dr. Muni, I have a question for you, and this relates back to RCEP, because everybody is concerned that India having stepped out, what will happen to the Indo-Pacific Economic Corridor? and whether it will become a more powerful force now with the emerging trends. Dr. Muni? Professor Muni? Oh, you're on mute.
Yes, no, I have unmuted myself.
Okay.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, India negotiated for several years on the RCEP, and there were initial assumptions that the RCEP would agree on those. One of the assumptions was the differential tariff structure. Secondly, there are many issues which India has raised in the negotiations, and that relates to subsidies and the protective production cycles, which some countries have been using. Therefore, if RCEP members now found it over hesitant in responding to those issues, India thought it was not suiting its interests to get into RCEP at this stage. But it has not closed its windows, and it is always willing to negotiate on the lines raised by them. By the way, besides China, India has FTAs with almost every country in the RCEP. Except Australia, we are negotiating, and I think New Zealand. Now, if that is negotiated virtually, we are part of the RCEP in bilateral terms, of course. But those are important. RCEP, of course, is a bigger group, and it will continue. And as I said, India has no hostility. India is still keeping the door open. But I think RCEP members have also to realize that if you want to get in a market of 1.4 or 1.5 billion people who are growing at the rate of 5 to 5.5% on an average at this time, except the COVID interlude, how can you neglect this kind of a market? And if you neglect this kind of a market, still, if you think you are happy, well, decide for yourself. This is where India is deciding for itself that on certain terms, it is difficult to get into the RCEP.
Dr. Muni, the window can be open, but the door also has to open at some stage.
No, we have been in negotiating process.
Yes, okay.
Look, I mean, they absolutely, I'm sorry, this is not a fair assessment, because India has been negotiating, and until the last moment, even when the negotiations were closed a few months back, we were trying and arguing on some of these issues that have some mechanism. You know, in ASEAN, for instance, you have very subtle two approaches. One for the underdeveloped countries of the ASEAN, Laos, Cambodia, Myanmar, and all that. Now, similarly, if you have such a big group and you completely neglect the sensitivities of one of the biggest markets in the region, well, I don't have to comment much upon that. So it's not, I'm sorry, the door is open always.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Muni.
Keeping windows open. But the terms have to be, look, no country would ever accept any agreement that militates against its basic interests.
Thank you for this reassurance. It's good to hear that coming from you. I have a question for Dr. Iftikhar, and this is whether the Indo-Pacific with a China +1 strategy could be something that is more acceptable than one which excludes China. So we're talking about Indo-Pacific with the China plus strategy as opposed to one that excludes China.
Well, the received wisdom, and I think there will be a consensus around this, what I'm just about to say. Yes, it should be included. I mean, everybody would want all the key players to be present. We do not want a confrontation. We believe that there will, of course, be competition, as I have said. But the fact is, just as India cannot be excluded, as Professor Muni has very clearly articulated, I mean, you have to be practical and pragmatic. You have to have the key players inside. You have to deal with India. You have to deal with China. Yes. The short answer to that is yes.
Thank you very much. Gentlemen, we seem to be running out of time. So we have to have one question where I would like the comments from each of the speakers. And this is, how can business communities in the region rally around the Indo-Pacific economic and political architecture to diversify their supply chains and develop a new ecosystem that parallels the BRI? Yeah, Olin, would you like to start the ball rolling? Because I would like comments from all of them. We have had such a lot of questions that this is trying to summarize many of the questions that have been asked.
I mean, I think a business has at its core the necessity for exchange, for openness, for a clear set of rules of the game, for rules that reflect fairness and reciprocal treatment. And I think business advocating for those kinds of outcomes for institutions and trade arrangements and mechanisms for stability and open exchange are very much in its interest. And I think, therefore, there's a common perspective from a fundamental standpoint between this broad notion, this vision of a free and open Indo-Pacific, and the interest of business interests in the region. And there should be ways found to bring those together, to mobilize business support around that kind of approach and set of values. The infrastructure area has been referenced several times in this discussion. And the infrastructure needs are enormous. There was reference made also by Dr. Nassim to the U.S. Likely emphasis on its own domestic infrastructure requirements. And that presents an enormous possibility for benefit across the region and for collaborative arrangements. And those kinds of collaborations based on values of openness, of fairness, of transparency will stand us all in great benefit over the long run. And so that's, I think, the kind of convergence that business ought to be seeking and that like-minded governments in the region should be pursuing.
Thank you. Mark, would you have something to add to this?
I would. I held public office in Northern Ireland, where I came from, as a commissioner of the Port of Belfast. And anybody who's been involved in ports and shipping know that business will happen, and business will happen irrespective of trading blocks and groups and the different agreements that are being put in place. There is a trading imperative, and we have found the United States to be overly reliant upon its international supply chain. As I suggested, I think that creates an enormous opportunity for your members to address the fact that there is going to be a requirement for investment in the United States. I know I spoke to a member of staff on Capitol Hill today who has been deeply involved in the trade negotiations arena. And I asked him for his particular views on the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. And he said, well, it's been going on in parallel with TPP since 2013. It was not a surprise to us. He viewed it as an effort to counter US influence. proffered that there will be new arrangements that will find with new titles, perhaps easier to remember titles. There's fewer acronyms, but business will be done between business people and irrespective of the structures we put around them.
Thank you. Dr. Chaudhary?
Yes. Okay. I believe that it is it would benefit for business to be open, rules-based, fair, and transparent. We look to a greater role, by the way, of the WTO, the World Trade Organization. And I hope that the incoming Biden administration would be very supportive of it. Our regional experience, of course, is that healthy competition rather than costly confrontation is the path to prosperity. And examples such as Bangladesh or Vietnam attest to that very simple but incontrovertible action. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Muni?
Yes. I think the business community in the region may have to operate at two levels. One is in collaboration with the governments, because this is a massive task, both on infrastructure and health services, particularly in the post-COVID situation. And post-COVID situation would leave many economies totally disrupted for various reasons. So you have to rebuild these supply chains, and neither governments alone can do it, nor the entrepreneur class alone can do that. So I think one would be for them to join hands and see what are the areas where there is mutual convergence, where there are resources, where there are skills available. Second would be at the level of the entrepreneurs themselves. Because as I said, and as I think Dr. Naseem also underlined it very clearly, that the task is so huge in terms of need for resources that the governments would not be able to put in all that is required. I mean, I don't want to go into how the BRI is being operated and all that. There are a lot of discomfort here and there. There is a lot of comfort here and there also for various reasons. But unless you join hands at your own level and try to fill in the gaps where the governments are unable, the state is unable to walk in, I think the task cannot be completed. And lastly, besides putting in resources, I think we are entering an era of economy which will heavily depend upon technology. And therefore, what you need to invest is in innovations. There are many, many businesses, at least I know from Indian experience, I know elsewhere also, where they are run quite inadequately professionally. And most of the families are involved in it. Most of the profit motive drives them rather than anything else. I think you have to get into the technological aspects where you have to invest money, and investing money in the innovations in each industry, entrepreneurs, is dismal, in fact, except for few exceptions here and there. Therefore, they will have to do something on the innovation side as well.
Thank you. Dr. Chaudhary?
Yeah,
sorry, you're
don't
muted.
have-
You have to
Yes,
unmute
hello.
yourself. Yes, yes.
Well, I agree broadly with Mr. Muni that the innovation is the key to drive the future businesses. Just yesterday, you must have seen that the SpaceX, which was a non-existent company a decade back, has now carrying astronauts to the space station, a private enterprise, and it shows the power of innovation. And India and the entire Asia has enormous potential to come out with the very innovative solutions, some very frugal and some may be of a global importance. For example, the Indian digital payment system, a very unique system by itself, has now been widely accepted as the solution for not only India, but almost the entire developing world. So these kind of innovation will drive the future businesses rather than purely profit making. And I am sure that collaboration on such a globally implementable platforms will be the way forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Dr. Nasim, you're certainly not the last but not the least, because it is your business that is we are talking about, and you have to round up this whole discussion in terms of how business can really move forward in these difficult times.
Okay, thank you, George. Like Professor Mooney said, one is obviously there is close coordination needed between the public and private sectors, because really you need this cooperation between the two sides. What are the issues why business? I mean, we are all have various treaties, economic programs, but really, is every country equally committed to these? We need to ask that question. Important thing is, are countries providing barrier-free access to businesses? I think not every country does. We need to simplify tax reforms. It's a nightmare for businessmen to understand complicated tax regimes in various countries. The other is transparency. People coming from business from other developed countries want to see transparency, where they don't have to understand any other rules except what's on the paper. The other is free flow of trade and capital and talent. It's hard to move people and capital into certain countries. Then again, it's also a bit of marketing, so that these norms are known to people in the business community in the region. I mean, one of the perception generally was that quite complicated to set up a business in India. Actually, we have set up a business in India, and we found it extremely easy with zero barrier. We didn't have to get 5,000 approvals from various agencies. It was very simple. So if we can have that kind of environment, business-friendly environment in countries, then my view is that business will flow and the region will prosper and economically work together. And that's really not happening in the practical sense. So, theoretically, all these things are fine, but really on the ground, you find there are a lot of barriers to entry. So we need to remove all those barriers. Thank you.
Thank you. Gentlemen, we have had such a large round of questions that it has been impossible for us to accommodate all of them. But we tried to summarize the gist of all those questions in the session today. Because of time constraints, we have to wind up now. And before I hand over to the CEO of Singapore Indian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Mr. Paul Johnson, who has been able to put this whole thing together, and with his personal connections with the speakers, he has been able to convince them to participate at such short notice. But believe me, this is not the end. This is only the beginning. We look forward to more interaction with you, given the kind of interest that this has generated, not only in Singapore, but actually from the region and overseas. So may I now hand over to Paul Johnson.
Thank you very much, Mr. George. It is now my pleasant duty to propose a vote of thanks. On behalf of SICCI, I express my sincere gratitude to Dr. Chandru, Chairman of SICCI, who mooted this idea and had us execute it, Mr. George Abraham, the moderator, and our distinguished speakers, Mr. Olin Wethington, Mr. Mark Findlay, Emeritus Professor Mooney, Dr. Sajjad Nasim, Dr. Iptika Chowdhury, and Dr. Vijay Chauthavale. I also want to thank the Board of Directors of SICCI who are present at this session. Special thanks to important guests who have joined us, particularly the High Commissioners and Ambassadors of various embassies. We are in the company of several retired ambassadors from India who have joined us, and we want to thank them for being part of this seminar. Also, many thanks to James Sung and Mr. Kwa Bunwi, the business elite who make up an important segment of our chambers. Most of all, we want to thank all of you who have spent your valuable time to be with us this afternoon. I hope you have benefited from this webinar and hope you will also allow us to connect you to the businesses in the Indo-Pacific region so that we can grow as a community. Thank you.
Gentlemen and Chairman, Chairman Chandru, thank you for initiating this. We hope that we can continue with this on a more regular basis so that we can address important issues. And we thank the speakers again, although Johnson has done it, and we look forward to working with you, not just in terms of ideas generated at a session like this, but how your input can help the business community to further its motives. Thank you again, and especially for those of you who have given up your sleep to participate in this session. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen. You've been a wonderful, wonderful
Thank you very much.
panelist. Thank you.